Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past week. Total box office domestically, a little under 74 million, which was actually a 31% drop, right? So the past couple of weeks, it's been holding pretty steadily. I think at one point there was a week that only dropped like 3 or 4%. Now you're starting to see, a lot more fluctuation. We're moving out of the period, January is usually the period of the American box office that's like the quote-unquote dead part. But I'd argue it's like the first couple of weeks of February. And the reasons why is January usually has very little, if any, big releases. But the box office as a whole is still being carried by the bigger films from November and December. Whereas now, like if you look here, we still have a couple films still from that time period, but most of these movies now at this point are from January, and the numbers reflect that, right? So the biggest new movie, I should say, of the week was Hard Eyes. So this opened at second place, so it couldn't even make number one, right? Hard Eyes, this is kind of like a horror rom-com film. It brought in a little over 8 million, which is just above the target that I had given it. So, it was able to kind of meet that. But again, the fact that the bounds of the projections were not very large, right? So even if it had cracked that 11 million, it still would not have been at number one, right? And considering it was made for $18 million, this is not off to a good start. But it doesn't mean it can't do well, right? I've the amount of times we've seen a movie, that, keeps, kind of week after week, kind of building a little bit of an audience, a little piece by piece here and there. But I'm not sure if this is gonna do it. It's definitely positioning itself as kind of like counter programming for Valentine's Day, or like the lovey season, if you will. But I don't know. I mean, luckily it hasn't been getting awful reviews. It's been getting like decent, at least on Letterboxd, it has like a 3.1-ish or something last time I looked. So, it's definitely not a dog shit movie, theoretically, in terms of like the general consensus. Can't say the same though for Love Hurts. This is the other new movie, opened at number 4. Made just a little under 6 million, so still met the projections, but on the lower end, to be sure. This is like I don't even know what you would call it, kind of like an action. Like if Hard Eyes was a horror rom-com, Love Hurts is like a action comedy rom-com-esque film with Kiwi Kwan. But it's weird because he's paired as a romantic interest with Ariana DeBose, and there's like a really weird age gap, so that kind of skeeves me out a little bit. But again, this is a movie that is not getting very good reviews, both like critically and also just like general audiences. And similarly, it also costs around $18 million, so also opening in the red. Another movie opening though, I don't have the budget numbers here, so we can't do quite an ROI comparison. But we have a documentary in the top 10. At number 8, we have Becoming Led Zeppelin. This is actually a limited release. I think it's going wide this week. But it brought in around 2.5 million. A little bit more though, so it actually exceeded these initial projections that I was able to find on boxofficetheory.com. And it just speaks to the interest in still in classic rock. I was listening to a podcast this morning talking about how so many of the Super Bowl commercials from this past weekend, if they featured music, it was statistically more likely to be like 70s classic rock, right? That it's considering that some of this music is 50 years old at this point, we're still kind of putting these specific musical artists kind of at like, putting them forth as like the best that the medium has produced. And I don't know if that's unfounded, right? Like Led Zeppelin's awesome. I love Led Zeppelin. It's also just really interesting to see a documentary in a limited release make the top 10. But again, that I think more so speaks to just the limited options and offerings that American moviegoers have at the moment. Because right now it's basically just what they've already been consuming week after week. So still at number one, holding its first place spot. On its second week, we have Dogman, the animated comedy that's kind of like a spin-off of the Captain Underpants franchise, brought in around 18 million, which was only a 49% drop, right? So, not incredible, but definitely not like, when sometimes we see these disastrous percent drops of like 60, 65, 70%. So what that shows me is, the second week drop, it's always going to be a decently sized percent drop, but this gives me a little bit of hope, right? That it can kind of maybe maintain some momentum. Because again, like, what's really going to be the competition for Dogman specifically? Again, you have Moana here, still in the top 10. Most likely it's last week in the top 10, though depending on, what ends up happening with some of these other films here. But Moana, if you're going to be like the reductive marketing person, Moana 2 is catering to little girls, so Dogman's going to cater to little boys, right? Just purely on like that, the 4-quadrant kind of analysis here, which again is very reductive and regressive. Dogman is in a good position right now. There's not really much that's going to compete with Dogman specifically. You are going to have a Marvel movie come out next week, spoiler alert. But that's, I think Dogman is targeted to a much younger audience. Not to say that they don't overlap, but they're not necessarily on top of one another. They're a Venn diagram with overlap, but they're not concentric circles, right? This brings its domestic total to around 54 million. Its worldwide total to around 66 million off of a $40 million budget, right? So it's crossed that initial threshold. Now we want to see it get to that 100%. So then really everything after that is just pure profit. Also, still in the top 10 here in its second week, Companion dropping from second to third place. This is kind of I don't even know how you would describe it. It's like I'm under the impression that so Wikipedia lists it as a science fiction dark comedy thriller, and I believe it's like the main character is like a companion robot, so kind of like of the ilk of kind of like the socially conscious science fiction films that while not a science fiction film, I feel like have really taken off dramatically at the box office since something like Get Out, right? Like more socially conscious, using genre as a way to critique the current state of affairs, right? This brought in a little over 6 million, a 34% drop. So again, holding pretty decently. This brings its domestic total to around 15.5 million, and its worldwide total almost to 27, off of a $10 million budget. So this is already in the green. This is the name of the game is ROI. I know studios love to see those big box office results, but if your movie cost, $100 million, $200 million, $250 million, the amount of money you're getting back, your dollar for dollar return is weak, right? So something like Companion, is a better, like if they just made 10 Companions, that would be very successful, right? And I have a feeling, again, there's not too much that I think is going to be it's going to be competing with. So this has the chance to kind of be a sleeper hit and just kind of keep making money week after week. Also still in the top 10, still in the top 5, holding its 5th place spot now in its 8th week is Mufasa, The Lion King. Brought in a little, what is it, like about 5.5 million. The legs on Mufasa. If you're just joining me out of context, you might be really confused. The legs on Mufasa are just astounding, right? So again, the legs is essentially a number generated by taking the total domestic box office, so in this case it'd be around 235 million, and dividing it by the biggest weekend that the film had, which is usually the opening weekend. But if it's a film like look at Becoming Led Zeppelin, I would imagine next week once it goes wide, or this upcoming week I should say, once it goes wide, that's going to be its biggest weekend. So that number, so the bigger this number, what this signifies is that the movie is not just making a bunch of money its opening weekend and then it gets bad word of mouth or people don't really give a shit about it and then it goes away. If that number, the bigger the legs number, the more money that it's making slowly over time. Which, doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the money that you make is the money you make. But what that shows is that it has enough word of mouth, or it has something about it that is getting people to come back to do repeat viewings, right? Its worldwide total is now $671.5 million off of a $200 million budget. So again, nowhere near the success of its Lion King live action predecessor. But considering how soulless the assignment seems, this is a pretty decent success for Disney. Also still in the top 10, but again, probably not going to be here for much longer. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 opened the same day as Mufasa. At this point now, at one point they were flipped where one had made more domestically and the other had made more worldwide. At this point, Mufasa has now surpassed Sonic in both, though just barely domestically, right? So Mufasa domestically is made around 235, and Sonic's made about 233, right? So not nearly as good of the legs here, but still very, very good. And again, while not near 700 million worldwide, near 500 million worldwide, it was basically $200 million short, almost exactly, from Mufasa. That's still pretty good, right? And considering it was actually cheaper than Mufasa, that it does still have that. It has that edge over Mufasa still. That at least dollar for dollar, it's making more money. Viviana writes, and I thought lions have 4 legs. Ha 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 ha. In the chat. If you want to put really corny jokes in the chat, I will read them. As long as you don't say anything offensive. And then lastly, like I mentioned before, Moana 2 is still here in the top 10, dropping from 7th to 10th place, but now in its 11th week. Again, this is this was not the highest grossing film from last year, but it was I think top 3. It is just a powerhouse, which again is strange considering how mediocre the reception was. But again, I think it's filling a niche that nothing else here in the top 10 is offering audiences. A animated musical for young girls specifically. Wicked was the main competition, and that really gave it a run for its money, but Wicked has since dropped out of the top 10, leaving Moana here at bringing in around $456 million domestically, over $1 billion worldwide, off of a $150 million budget. So we are, well into February at this point, and this movie that came out Thanksgiving week is still here making money. So while not the same staying power as something like Mufasa, because Moana opened really big and then had a pretty precipitous fall, despite that, it's still here, right? We're still talking about it. And I think that, whether it deserves it or not, it warrants at least that recognition. And then looking ahead to the this upcoming weekend, we have the next film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain America: Brave New World. This is focusing on Sam Wilson, aka the Falcon, aka the new Captain America. This is projected to make around 80 to 105 million. I'm gonna put the target around 92. I forget what Deadpool and Wolverine opened at. I want to say 200 million, but that seems really big. Is that what it? Yeah, it opened around 211 million this past summer. This is projected even on the higher end to only open at half that. Which makes sense because that was a Deadpool movie. It was the return of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. It was multiversal. It was summer. It was a summer movie. So this is still, this would still be a really good opening, I think, especially since Marvel has kind of been stumbling over the past couple of, maybe let's say 5 or 6 years. So, you know, I'm sure they wish that this was a lot bigger of projections, but let's just see where it lands. Maybe it'll exceed these expectations. Who the hell knows? And then we also have Paddington in Peru, the third Paddington movie, projected to make around 15 to 23 million. I'm gonna put a target around 18. I liked the first one. I've still not seen the second one. I'm planning on going to see this. I think it's next week on my calendar. So I'm going to try to rewatch the first one and then finally watch the second one. People are obsessed with these movies. And I thought the first one was fine. Maybe I was missing something. So I'm excited to, if I'm able to get to it, I am excited to revisit these. But again, not really expected to really shake the box office in any meaningful way. Wow, what an interesting story. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the topic, so comment below, let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really, really helps people find the channel and makes me feel all warm inside. Until next time, I'm Peter Mancuso. Peace out.